Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Walid Salem. I'm the director of the Jerusalem Press Club. Welcome you to today's briefing with Walid Salem. Please switch off your cell phone or turn them into silent mode. That will help here. We are running a series of events marking the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, which for Jews, of course, is a cause of great celebration. But we thought it might be interesting also to give a voice to many Palestinians who live in the city and to see what their perspective is on these events. So we're very happy to have Walid Salem with us this morning. He's a lecturer of democracy, human rights, and conflict resolution at Quds University. He's a PhD candidate in international relations at Near East University in northern Cyprus. Should tell us later how's life there. He's the director of the Center for Democracy and Community Development in East Jerusalem, author of many books and research papers on democracy, civil society, peace building, citizenship, refugee issues, and Jerusalem. He's also a member, still a member of the PLO, Palestinian National Council.
Yeah, this is, since 1996, but we did nothing to us.
Last but not least, we are good old friends, and I'm very happy
to see you today,
to host you here. Usually what we do is 20 or so minute talk, and then we'll open the Q&A. Walid, please.
Okay.
The perspective from East Jerusalem.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a very good surprise to see Uri also today, so I did not see him a long time ago. And let me start when talking about East Jerusalem. Let me go personal more than academic. Okay, I can make long academic talks about Jerusalem, and I do that, but I prefer to go personal. Okay, and when East Jerusalem was occupied in 1967, 5th of June 1967, I was a few days less than 10 years old at that time. And in 28th of June 1967, when the Israeli government at that time, led by Levi Eshkol, decided to enforce the Israeli law over the Palestinian occupied territories in 1967, including East Jerusalem, I was 10 years old. So it was my birthday. So my birthday, 28th of June 1967, the day I finished my 10 years, it was the day when Israel enforced its law over the occupied territories of 1967, including East Jerusalem. So you can consider that my late childhood and my early young period was under Israeli occupation. So I'm a man who grew up through the years of occupation. The 50 years of occupation that already passed are my life. And my personal memories, all my personal memories are connected to this fact, to this kind of fact. It is 50 years of life under occupation that I personally passed, okay? And all my memory is connected to these 50 years. So this is as a starting point on the issue. One of the striking matters for me was when, as a child at that period, was when I was looking to this was the first striking thing, when I was looking to the travel documents that the Israeli government gave to Palestinians from East Jerusalem. I carry one with me. It's called the travel document. Now, when I was very young, I was looking to this kind of travel document, and the first question that came to my mind, why it's written here, just in the cover page, why it's written this travel document does not constitute an attestation of citizenship of the bearer. Okay, that's fine. I agree. I do not want Israeli citizenship. Okay?
You don't?
But I don't. But at the same time, why it include the following wording, according to paragraph 2b of the law of passport 1952. So I was occupied in 1967. Why you will impose on me a law that was released in Israel in 1952, 15 years before I was occupied? You got me? So the point, I was occupied in 1967, but you imposed on me a law that was released in 1952, and you started to deal with me according to a law that was released 15 years before my East Jerusalem was occupied. This is the issue. Besides that, when I go here to the travel document, you will see here nationality Jordanian. So this is not a citizenship document. This is a document of travel document, laissez-passer, that tells that I am a Jordanian. Now, I checked the Israeli law and the Israeli government resolutions at that time when I became older, and found out that the Israeli government will define the Palestinians living in East Jerusalem to be as Jordanian citizens residing permanently in Israel. Jordanian citizens living permanently in Israel. This is our definition according to the Israeli authorities. Now, still the devil is in the details. I found later that the permanent residence does not mean really permanent residence. In one hand, we are Jordanians. In second hand, we are permanent residents. But the permanent residency is not really permanent. The permanent residency, according to the Israeli law imposed in East Jerusalem, requires the Palestinian to live continuously in East Jerusalem for 7 years. Sorry, let me put it differently. Consider that if the Palestinian leave Jerusalem for 7 years, it's the opposite, leave Jerusalem for 7 years, he or she will lose the residency status in East Jerusalem. So this is the law. The law that you should stay in East Jerusalem as much as you are living in East Jerusalem, as much as you getting residency rights in East Jerusalem. But if you leave Jerusalem for 7 years, the time of 7 years, you will lose this residency right. Why? Because you are a Jordanian. According to the Israeli authorities, you are a Jordanian, you leave the country for 7 years, and you lose your residency. So it's not really permanent residency. You might lose it if you leave the city for 7 years. Besides that, you might lose it for other reasons. For instance, if the Israeli government considers you to be a threat to the Israeli security, you might lose it. I'll give different examples on that. One example was the early example of Dr. Mubarak Awad. Dr. Mubarak Awad is a Palestinian Christian who was holding Palestinian Jerusalem ID. He was living in East Jerusalem, and during the first Intifada in 1987, he started a campaign calling for boycotting the Israeli products. The government of Yitzhak Shamir at that time considered his call for boycotting the Israeli products to be very dangerous against Israel, and therefore they decided to take out his Jerusalem ID. He applied to the Israeli High Court at that time, and the Israeli High Court approved his deportation. Ever since, he's teaching in the American University in Washington. So he's now a professor in the American University in Washington, and he still believes on non-violent struggle. So he boycotted, he called for boycotting Israeli products and Palestinian non-violent struggle at that time in 1987, and he still till today called for comprehensive non-violent resistance against occupation, and he's completely against any kind of armed struggle. The other example that was made last year or the year before, when the Jerusalem citizenship or Jerusalem residency, sorry, it's not citizenship, Jerusalem residency were taken from Hamas members in the Palestinian Legislative Council from East Jerusalem. And now they are living in Ramallah. So their Jerusalem residency were taken from them and they are living now in Ramallah. There are, of course, other examples. Now, if I continue focusing my talk about this issue of residency, because I do not want to talk about buildings and settlements. You know all the information about settlement. I think you might know a lot about the settlement expansion in East Jerusalem, the number of Israelis were 0 in 1967 in East Jerusalem, and now it's over than 200,000 Israelis living in East Jerusalem in settlements. And I think you know the information that East Jerusalem before 1967 was only 6 square kilometers, but the Israeli governments doubled the number 12 times, so it's 72 square kilometers in the east side of the city by annexing parts of West Bank to East Jerusalem. I think I would guess that these kind of information are known and can be found in different writings. But what is this wrote about is how people live. This is the reason I am talking about the issue of residency in East Jerusalem, because it's about how the people live more than about buildings and settlement expansion and all of this discussion about Judaization of Palestinian land that you hear everywhere. So let me continue talking about the issue of residency, and which has to do with the people right to live in the city. The right to live in the city, as I mentioned, which is a human right, was under attack since 1960 by having this new definition of us being Jordanian citizens residing permanently in Israel. I tackled the issue of residing permanently, and I showed that it's not about residing permanently. It's about residing for a short period, for a certain period of time, and if you violate it, you lose your residency in the city. Let me take the other part, which is the residency in the city. The residency in the city. Residency, you know, residency is something different than citizenship. To be a citizen means that you have a reciprocal relationship of duties and rights with the state. But the Palestinians do not have a state in one hand. And the second hand, the Israeli occupation force is not the Palestinian state, it is occupation force. It is in one hand belligerent occupation, but in other hand it is settler colonial project where you have expansion of settlements, and you have also, excuse me for the word, you have apartheid practices towards the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. If you want to talk about the Palestinian residency in East Jerusalem, we need to take in consideration that this kind of Palestinian residency of Jerusalem in East Jerusalem face 6 important policies that all of them are problematic. The first policy is the disconnection between the human being and the land. The land is already declared to be an Israeli land. Therefore, the human being has no access to the land. The land is subject to confiscation and subject also to creating settlements, Israeli Jewish settlements over these territories. So, disconnection between the human being and the land. This disconnection between the human being and the land is connected to the idea of dispossession of people from East Jerusalem by the practices that took place in 1967, such as demolishing Al-Sharaf neighborhood in the old city of Jerusalem, for example, and such as IDs confiscation, taking the identity cards of the Palestinians because they violate the residency law in East Jerusalem. So the disposition. Besides the disposition, you have the issue of the replacement. So in one hand, you displace, but in second hand, you replace by creating settlement and growing settlements in the city. These three are connected with the fourth one, which is closure, closing Jerusalem and disconnect East Jerusalem from West Bank. And this is already in 29th of March 1993, the Israeli government imposed full closure around Jerusalem, which is already now 24 years. So the people from Gaza Strip and West Bank who born in 1993 do not know Jerusalem because they are not allowed to visit it. So there was full disconnection from West Bank. So this is number 4. Number 5, isolation, which means that the people who are staying in East Jerusalem are isolated from West Bank people on one hand, and they are isolated from each other in the second hand. For instance, if I move, how they are isolated from each other from another hand, I'll give an example. For instance, I live in Shafat. In order, when I come walking, I walk every day, and I like walking. I come walking from Shafat to the old city. In my way, I will pass Ramat Shlomo, and then pass also, I'll pass Israeli, Jewish, and also the Gavat HaTzarkatit, the French hill in my way, where I can see Jewish settlements on my way. So between Shafat and East Jerusalem, there are Jewish neighborhoods. And you can find that also between each Palestinian community and another one. So this is the issue of isolation. And finally, discrimination in all levels. In my academic research, I call the Israeli policies in East Jerusalem to be about de-democratization, because the people already were prevented to have their own representation. In 1967, the Israeli government dissolved the Jerusalem municipality of the Palestinians, and the Palestinians are still calling for regaining back their municipality. And this is the reason that they are...
You can't vote for the Israeli municipality?
Now, of course, the Israeli call, we dissolved your municipality, vote to ours. This is for Palestinians, this is not fair. What's fairness is that you dissolved our municipality, bring our municipality back. Don't tell us to vote to your municipality that discriminate on all services.
If you vote there, you're 1/3 of the population. You can take over. You can decide who the mayor will be.
Let us discuss that.
Sorry for
no, it is a point for discussion. But as a human right, the people want to have their representatives. So our representatives municipality was dissolved at that time. We want our representatives back. And our representatives are people from our side, not through a shared municipality with the other. We can later, as part of political solution, we can look for, like London or Toronto in Canada, we can look for an umbrella municipality that include both sides together, but also at the same time separate municipalities. But before getting to the joint municipality, we want to have our own municipality. So this is the idea. So there is a process of de-democratization. There is a process of de-development in East Jerusalem. For instance, the municipality collects from East Jerusalem more than 16% of its taxes. Some people say it's up to 20%, and they give services that up to 5% of the budget of the municipality. So there is a problem on that. So this is a problem of de-development, and there is a problem of de-equalizing, I call it, which is a problem that you have, you do not have equality in the treatment between Jewish communities and Palestinian communities in East Jerusalem. So at the end, residency that in East Jerusalem is problematic because it's about ethnic cleansing on one hand by taking identity cards. It's about fragmentation of the Palestinian community in East Jerusalem by dividing between one community and another, which through having settlements between each one and the other. And it's about discrimination in all the services that the Israeli government and the Israeli municipality is giving in the city. So I think with that said, maybe I passed already 20 minutes.
Yeah. With this happy note,
and I will go first. Yeah.
We'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Hello, Gil Zohar, the Chicago Jewish Star. When there's peace and there's a separate municipality of East Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, how will the East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem fit? You have to show a passport to go from one to the other? How will this work?
What a question. There is, about this question, there are already, in 1980s, now the number might be bigger than that. In 1980s, Miron Ben Venesti calculated 106 scenarios to answer your question. There was.
Well, what's your answer?
I am telling you.
Let's start with one.
Yeah, so mine will be as, so there are, you can read all of these scenarios, too many scenarios. Mine will be as follows. I will go for something like, two capitals with open borders between them, between the capitals. This is the in the political level. So there will be two capitals with open borders between the two capitals, Israeli capital of Israel and capital of Palestine. On the administrative level, I already alluded to that. I will go for something like one umbrella municipality for the joint issues between the two parties, Israelis and Palestinians, and two separate municipalities at the same time. And even it might be more than two, because it's subject how you administratively you will divide the city. So this is in the administrative level.
Ultra-Orthodox Jewish one, maybe.
Yeah, this is
language, I guess.
Kind of details that, that we have to find out. And on the religious level, there should be some kind of joint committee or council that will coordinate together how to run the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian holy places in the old city, and to have some kind of coordination on these kinds of processes, on the basis, of course, of respect of freedom of worship of all the three monotheistic religions. And their freedom of access to their holy places. So this would be in general, and if you want more details, we can say more about that.
Yeah, I think we want more details.
Yes, actually we do. Yeah. Who will pick up the garbage? Who will control the traffic lights?
What about police?
Yes.
Police chasing a
jaywalker who goes from one street to the next. Who will give him the ticket for jaywalking?
Right. These, as I said, there are a lot of proposals about all of these issues. And now, of course, regarding, I made suggestions about the overall formula, how it look like. Then when you come to the police, there should be two different separate police powers, but there, of course, there should be some kind of coordination between the different police forces from both sides.
There's a high level of cooperation already between Palestine and Israel, so it's not unheard of.
Right, so there are already a lot of examples. And when it comes to services, again, each municipality will have the right to collect, to do the services, including the garbage and the others in its territory. So each municipality will have municipal responsibilities in its territory. And on the joint ones, there should be coordination. And the joint ones there are many joint ones. Water issues, electricity issues, these are kind of issues that need to be fully coordinated, and there are, of course, other issues that I just mentioned.
Sewage, in one way, we all connect.
Right. So there are issues that will need coordination, full coordination between the two sides.
Yes, please.
Harlan Wexler, Sirius XM Radio. You raised the basic issue of residency. It's not at all unusual, it seems to me, that residency can be decided by a sovereign state or even municipality as giving certain benefits and as taking benefits away. For example, as an Israeli citizen, I am covered by medical care. If I leave the country for more than 6 months, I lose that coverage. Now that may be a disadvantage for me, but it's not either irrational or anti-democratic for the government of the State of Israel to make a decision like that, because it handles issues of medical care, and it can give rights and it can take rights away, sometimes depending upon residency. The basic issue that you phrased is that you have refused residency, you have refused citizenship. And therefore, the government of the State of Israel, I would imagine, has to create a category as a result of your refusal. If you did not refuse, then we'd have a totally different discussion. Then, in fact, the law of the State of Israel would apply equally and should apply equally to every person who is a citizen of the state, regardless of whether they are of Palestinian origin, or Jewish origin, or whatever, Circassian origin. But isn't that the issue? The decision to not become a citizen really forces the government into a difficult position. And just as if I were to live abroad, it's not necessarily in my best interest. I'd much rather come back to Israel and get medical care. The government says to me, you can't do that as a non-resident. So isn't the issue really the Palestinian decision, or your own personal decision? I don't know that it's a Palestinian decision, but your personal decision to not become a citizen. Then you have to take the problems that come with that, because that is a problem. There is a sovereign nation here called Israel, and if, for whatever reason, you reject that, you're forcing these problems on yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, according for me, the issue is, and for the Palestinians, the issue is that Israel is an unrecognized occupier, belligerent occupier to East Jerusalem. And according to, and this is not my position as Palestinian, this is the international law. The resolutions of the UN, even the UN Security Council, consider the Israeli presence in East Jerusalem to be an occupier and an occupying situation. So this is occupation. So Israel has, by no means, has any right to impose its law in East Jerusalem, and has no any right to decide for me.
Well, not West Jerusalem.
Just a minute. Well, Israel has the right to decide for West Jerusalem and for Israel. West Jerusalem is part of Israel. This is, we agreed on that. Now, so yeah, so now, for us,
according to his opinion.
Yeah.
Well, just to make things clear.
Yeah. So now, you can think an Israeli, does Israel has sovereignty over East Jerusalem, but this is, your thinking on this is contradictory to the international law, contradictory to the United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council resolution that consider East Jerusalem to be part of the occupied territories of 1960. So instead of Israel taking time to think about my residency and citizenship in Israel, Israel should take its responsibility, get to a peace agreement between the two sides that will lead to sharing Jerusalem between the two sides, East Jerusalem for Palestine and West Jerusalem for Israel, with an agreed upon arrangement for the freedom of worship for both sides, and also the Jewish quarter in the Old City. Besides these issues, East Jerusalem is Palestinian and West Jerusalem is an Israeli, and this will need a willing by Israel to have a peace agreement, and they're willing to go in negotiations that will lead to a peace agreement on this issue.
So by the way, just today I read in Haaretz that it's not clear that Israel, even if these people wanted to become citizens, Israel makes it so difficult for them to do it. I mean, just to go in the Ministry of Interior in East Jerusalem, it takes months to just get inside, and even then, people who want, and I wonder what's the game here. I mean, I think it it would be best for Israel if these people would become citizens of Israel. Instead of having this limbo, you know, where you don't know what's going on. In the meantime, you guys enjoy all the social security benefits, the Hadassah, no, or everything. So that's one way to not to be citizen, but enjoy all the perks that come with it.
Yeah.
We have a saying, ללכת
Yeah.
עם ולהרגיש בלי, או ההפך, something.
The issue is as follows. Now, according to international law, again, the occupying authority is obliged to provide people with their rights during the occupation period. So this is not a favor done for Palestinians when it comes to the kind of services that the Palestinians getting in Jerusalem. But when the Palestinians, because of the services they get, they will think to give up with their Palestinian citizens, with their Palestinian national affiliation, and to become citizens of Israel. This is some kind of wishful thinking that some people might think about. The Palestinians in Jerusalem, they think of themselves as Palestinians, and this is the reason that the vote for the West Jerusalem municipality is not more than 2% to 3% in the highest level of participation on the municipal elections. The people here are thinking of themselves as Palestinians, and they want a political solution that will bring the two people to a peaceful relation between Israel and Palestine. The aim is two-state solution with peaceful relationship between both of them. And the way that I will promote personally will be a way through negotiations. And negotiations will depend on having leadership who will be willing to have negotiations and who will be willing to present inclusivist ideas that are good for both sides, not exclusive at once, that you should accept my sovereignty, and this is not fair. To think of me in a way that either you accept my sovereignty over the city and get my citizenship, this is an exclusive way of thinking. And it's not fair for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. What is fair?
We have leadership is like this on the Palestinian side.
What is fair is thinking of getting to negotiations table with goodwill that aims to find a solution of win-win to both sides, not win-lose, where one side will.
Do we have such Abu Mazen?
Is already there. Yeah, it brings Netanyahu.
He refused to come to the negotiation. He keeps putting preconditions just for coming to the negotiation table. Excuse me for making things.
No, thank you, Uri, for this. As you know, the issue of settlement freeze is part of the roadmap. It's not conditioned by Palestinians. So when Abu Mazen says that freeze of settlements before coming to negotiations, this is not a
precondition?
This is in the roadmap. This is obligation also in the roadmap.
Why not come to the negotiation? And now sit down, talk about everything.
And now what's going on is as follows. Now is during the last month, Abu Mazen already gave approval to meet with President Trump, even without settlement freeze.
Okay.
So, and Netanyahu now is rejecting. So they address the problem. The problem is the Israeli side, and everybody knows that the problem is Netanyahu government. It's not Abbas. Abbas is already accept, and he give, to President Trump, he gave him the approval to go ahead. He told him that he trusts him fully to do it, to break the deal between the two sides, convince Netanyahu to come to the table.
You, just before we move to Richard, mentioning Trump, you think moving the American embassy to Jerusalem is a good move?
Of course not. Moving the embassy to East Jerusalem should be combined with having embassy to Palestine in East Jerusalem.
West Jerusalem.
Otherwise,
Jerusalem.
If you have one embassy for one side, before having an embassy in East Jerusalem with the second side, this is unbalanced move. So the best will be to have some kind of peace agreement. We will have two capitals American capital, American embassy to Israel in West Jerusalem, and the American embassy to Palestine in East Jerusalem. In this way, it will be fair. But moving it one side without the other, it will be problematic.
Richard.
Two questions, if I may. You refer to it as wishful thinking. There's been polling, I think, in the last year or so that suggested that in a peace agreement, Palestinians, Israeli Arab Jerusalemites would actually prefer to be part of the state of Israel and not the state of Palestine.
See it again?
In polling, it would suggest polling Israeli Arabs of East Jerusalem would prefer to be citizens and members of an
Israeli Arabs?
Israeli Arabs of East Jerusalem.
What do you mean, Israeli Arabs of
East Jerusalemites. The East Jerusalemites would actually prefer to keep their
people like him.
Right. Would prefer to keep the benefits and the benefits of the modern state of Israel, as opposed to what is a gamble of what will be in a state of Palestine.
So one at a time. Okay. So what do you say?
Yeah. So what's poll you are referring to?
I was seeing a poll in Israeli media. It was at the end of last year, asking just Jerusalemites, Arab Jerusalemites.
I suggest to you to go to other polls of the
Khalil Shkaki?
yes, right, and which is August 2016, Khalil Shkaki Center, and you'll see different results from that. So it depends on what poll you are talking about, who did the poll, what is the people who were asked, and therefore this is dependent on
But
the
what is your sense?
But at the same time that we have the polls, we have something very valid, that the Palestinian voting to the West Jerusalem municipality, we call it West Jerusalem municipality because it's not ours. It is 2 to 3%, and this is valid since 1970 today. This is a very good sign through voting that the Palestinians of East Jerusalem do not accept Israeli sovereignty over the city. They do not even accept voting on the municipality. So this is one example that might lead you to think about these polls and the validity of them.
Question is what people think deep in their hearts, but that's maybe difficult to judge by the polls. The second question.
Second question, as much as we all will hope that President Trump will come and recreate what hasn't been achieved in 20 years, my question is, what, in the absence of a peace deal in the short term, are there any steps that you recommend that you would take that can improve the situation of East Jerusalemites in the absence of an agreement?
In the absence of peace deal? Yeah, there are obligations on Israel that Israel should do in East Jerusalem. Some of them according to the previous agreements between the two sides, and some of them according to the international law. According to the previous agreements, Israel committed through the letter sent by Shimon Peres, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel at that time in 1994, to Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Mr. Holst, Johan Holst, in 1994. At that letter, 1994...
The secret letter.
No, it's not secret.
Until Netanyahu exposed it in the Knesset.
It is, I don't know what letter you're talking about. I'm talking about a letter that was not secret.
The same letter.
Yeah, it is a letter which speaks about keeping that Israel commit itself to preserving the Palestinian institutions in East Jerusalem. Israel later on closed the Orient House and closed another 13 institutions in East Jerusalem. This is violation to the agreements with the PLO, which Israel committed itself to keep these institutions open in East Jerusalem. So this is according to the agreements. According to the international law, Israel should stop settlement expansion in East Jerusalem. This is on the expense of the Palestinians in the city, and Israel is obliged, according to the international law, to provide with all the services that the people under occupation should have till they get, their independence and the end of occupation.
More? Okay, Walid.
Please.
Please.
On a personal note, but representing the 350,000 people, So with your laissez-passer, do you go to Ben Gurion Airport or Queen Alia Airport? And question two, has King Abdullah annulled your Jordanian passport?
Now, this is a good question about our relations
I
with
don't mean
Jordan.
to ask you personally, I'm just saying as a representative of these 350,000 people.
We have, as I said, we have the Israeli travel document, which I clarified. At the same time, we have Jordanian passports, but it is not, but it's different than the passport that are given to Jordanians. The passports given to Jordanians, it is Jordanians. So when they put nationality or type, sorry, there is a category in the Jordanian passport, type J, Jordanian. In ours, they put type P, type Palestinian. So the Jordanians are giving us also temporary Jordanian passport, okay, temporary Jordanian passport, which is type P, which means type Palestinian. So here is the awkward situation, therefore, that we have. In one hand, Jordan recognized us as Palestinians, type P, in the passport that they give us, and Israel considers us to be Jordanians. Therefore, the question who we are, okay? Because in one hand you have recognition as a Palestinian, in second hand you are considered to be Jordanian. So this is really...
And you refuse to be Israeli.
Which
There's third one that you refuse to be an Israeli.
Yeah, right.
Which
You want to be
airport do you
Palestinian, right?
go to?
Yeah, sorry?
Which airport, international airport, do you go to?
Why this is an important question?
I'm trying to understand how 350,000
Yeah.
people live.
Yeah.
When you go to Ben Gurion, how they treat you?
As you know, because there are, you know, life goes on. So when, practically speaking, whenever I have time, I go through Ben Gurion Airport. Yeah.
Yes, you go through.
Yes. So to Europe, I go through Ben Gurion Airport. But when I go to Arab countries, yeah,
Go through Oman.
I go through Oman because there are no
Yes.
travels from Ben Gurion to these countries. So we use, practically speaking, we use the two airports. Yeah.
I have a question for you. There's an old notion in Israel called Jordan is Palestine. Because Jordan is already 60, 70, who knows, percent Palestinians. And the idea, maybe it's Israeli wishful thinking, that one day the problem will be solved and Palestinians will have a state. They look to the east, and Israel will be so. And then it becomes a question of territorial or geographical issues, not such loaded issue like we have directly between Israelis and Palestinians. What do you think about this notion of Jordan is Palestine?
So the question, if Jordan should be Palestine?
If Jordan becomes Palestine because it's already demographically speaking leaning towards being majority of Palestinians, and then you have a state, it's called whatever you want to call it, but it goes from Transjordan and part of the West Bank, and that's it.
You know, looking to solutions that means, let me put it that way. There is
You're talking about occupation.
Yeah.
It was occupied from Jordan, not from Palestinians.
No.
So there's a question here.
Now, you are raising different questions, by the way, at the same time. According to Lausanne Agreement, so let me start on the following way. According to Lausanne Agreement between the European countries, and then followed by Cyprus Agreement between
Sanremo.
Sanremo and Cyprus, even Cyprus, which is with the Turkish, you know. I quote, here is the state, here is what's written there. All the Ottoman provinces, previous provinces, are eligible to self-determination. This is what's written there. Now, Palestine was Ottoman province. Therefore, according to these conventions, Palestine was supposed to have its self-determination. This self-determination that Palestine was supposed to have, Palestine did not get till today. So coming to tell that Palestine, West Bank was occupied from Jordan without taking this history in consideration and without taking the resolution 181 that spoke about two states where Palestine was not implemented. So you see there is a history then. So Palestine is a state that was recognized, the right of Palestinians for a state was recognized since 1920s, and it's not implemented till today. 100 years after of the recognition of the right of Palestine to be a state, it is time for Palestinians to get their state. This is the issue. The issue is not that Israel occupied it from Jordan. Now, therefore, if the issue that Palestine should have its right to have its states, then let us leave aside all of these ideas that because Israel created facts in the ground, let us go for another solution, which is Palestinians start to fight against the Hashemite kingdom, in Jordan and create their state there. This was a kind of strategy that already the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, an organization 1970s used. They said we should take over the regime in Jordan in order to, but they said that in order to liberate Palestine. They want first to create a basis in Jordan to liberate Palestine. So opposite to what you said.
Jordan becomes
but now the idea, the common ground between all Palestinians is as follows. Jordan is Jordan. Jordanians have their state, and Palestinians have the right to have also their state that live in peace with both Israel and Jordan. So this is the formula. Let us not escape it by finding a solution which gives Israel the right to keep the West Bank in its hands, while Palestinians has to find their way by fighting in another country.
Well, we're talking 2-state or 3-state, because you have Gaza, and you don't seem to settle the things with Gaza.
Gaza, my friend, is the story of Gaza is very complicated, and you yourself, you wrote too many about that. The rift between Palestinians is not only Palestinian. There is an Israeli angle on it, and there is an international angle of it. So it's more complicated than being just a problem between Abbas and Hamas. It is more complicated. There are Israelis vetoes about Palestinian reconciliation if it will not be according to a certain program. There is international also veto against Palestinian reconciliation if it doesn't meet certain quartet conditions.
So it's our fault. It's our fault, not your.
No, I am saying that there are responsibility of three sides. There is Palestinian responsibility, and Palestinians are to be blamed for the absence of unity. But also there are an Israeli angle on that, and there is also an international angle.
But in the long run, you see one day in a solution between Israel and Palestine, you see Palestine based on West Bank and Gaza, or it's a lost case?
According to the agreement between Fatah and Hamas on 2006 in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, which still stands till today, it's a valid agreement. In case that Abbas will have an agreement with Israel, it will be brought to a referendum between the Palestinians, and if it gets the majority Palestinian support, Hamas will not object it. So there is already, even though that there are Palestinian division, but the issue will be brought to a referendum, and the people will decide on this referendum.
I want to conclude with asking you a very personal question. I know for many years, and you never lost hope in a peaceful resolution of the conflict. How do you maintain this optimism?
I maintain this optimism till today and till tomorrow. I was very, very frank with you in this room. And as you saw, my approach that I'm still promoting, and this is the reason that I do not lose hope, I still all the times, despite all the difficulties, call for win-win solution, where each side will recognize the other as equal. Do not, and leave aside all exclusivist policies that this is ours and you should look of your rights within the framework that we give to you. Instead of thinking that, tell the other side, think of the your rights within the framework that I decide in advance for you. Let us think differently, find a way that we all think together how to find a solution. I believe on non-violent struggle and negotiations. Armed struggle for me is not the way out. I was against it. I wrote articles against it since 1995, clear in Haaretz newspaper and in Palestinian newspapers. So I believe on the right of the two people on equal basis, on the basis of that there will be a solution that take in consideration the rights of both and also justice, not to be to one side against the other, but justice to all. And the framework and justice to all means fair distribution of it. This is the meaning of justice. Fair distribution of justice. This is the formula. And these kind of conventions keep me going on, and this is the reason I am today here, and I will be here again and again.
Walid, until we reach the final solution, final solution is not a final status settlement. I have a win-win deal for you, and it's our membership card.
Thank you. I will, with honor, I accept it. Thank you.
It gives you, wherever you go, either through Amman or through Ben Gurion, if you reach Abu Dhabi or Geneva or Brussels or anywhere in the world, you go, you show a card, and you get all the benefits free. So win-win for you already. Thanks for coming.
It's my honor to have it. Thank you very much.